Alan. How you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. You're on the pretty much opposite side of the pond and that big ball, right?
That's exactly right. Just north of Sydney, Australia, by about 160 kilometres, in a place called Newcastle, which is right on the coast.
And as I saw, you're actually Tuesday morning as we speak.
That's right. Well, actually, just passing lunchtime, or coming on to just after 12 o'clock at the moment. So
So weird.
you're on
Uh,
Monday, so welcome to the future.
ex- exactly. And so for anyone that listens, I'm 8 o'clock at night in North America, Quebec, and so yeah, as Alan says, we're having a conversation with the future right now. Um, um, let's start off by pretty much a question that has been recurring in the past year or so. Um, well, I've asked you where you're located, but how has been the pandemic going for you so far?
Well, for me personally, because my business is all about relationships, the pandemic has been a boom for my business because I'm now connected to people all over the world that in larger numbers than I've ever been connected before. Pandemic's been dreadful from the point of view of the lost lives, and it has affected a lot of people's mental health issues. But it's another reason why my business has thrived because so many people have needed those skills.
Have you seen a rise in, like kind of the precarity of mental health and like a rise in, like in anxiety and panic? And have you seen it?
Massive increase in it. We've found that, we're social beings, and when we lock people away and tell them that they've got to socially distance, I really hate that term. Every time I heard it, I cringed because, yes, we have to physically distance from each other to minimize the transmission of COVID. But to tell people you've got to be socially distanced, that really caused a lot of problems. And people locked in at home were now in an environment that they weren't used to. They used to get, might have had pressures at work, but at least they had the time to travel from home to work. But now the days seem to be get longer. People were putting more time into their work. They've got the kids around, they've got their partner around, and there was no respite from anybody. And because of that, a lot of people, the situation got worse. In Australia, leading up to it, we had about 8 people a day were committing suicide. And when you think that, well, our population compared to yours or even America, like America's got the same physical landmass that we've got, but we've only got 23 million people compared to their 300 million plus. So we had 8 people a day to take their lives, and 6 of those to be men is quite a huge number. But then we hit the pandemic, and that escalated. Mental health issues have gone up dramatically, mainly because of the isolation and the frustrations that have been coming from it.
And do we have yet numbers to kind of support that?
Not as yet. All we're getting is reports, say, from the police, for instance, who have said they've had more calls on domestic violence than they've had before. Uh, I run a group called the Campfire Project where we get people to phone in from all over the world, come into it's a Facebook group and share their stories. And every conversation I've been having with people, they've talked about how the pressures in their life have increased since the pandemic. So we're getting a lot of people talking about it, but no actual real firm stats, because the stats usually take a while to be compiled.
Absolutely. Yep. It is, like it's not funny, but like I'm so curious about it. Like that I've asked that question many, many times, and um, it all gravitates around either people being impacted themselves by it, right? Like I've told the story many times about, like it developed a sense of being comfortable at home. I mean,
Hmm.
it should be, like everyone should be comfortable at home, but Um, I was telling my listeners about the it was an anniversary, and we went for dinner,
Mm,
and there was some subtle sigh of relief when I got back to my car with my wife because I knew I was driving back home.
mm,
And I immediately told my wife about it. I said, "It's not that I wasn't comfortable, but I can't help it but to have that kind of that feeling, which is kind of the almost like the shadow of a feeling."
that's right.
And I'm not an anxious individual. I'm not, you know, I can be called an introvert, and I can be called um, somewhat someone that likes to stay home. But it was different. Um, and I all I had was thoughts for anyone that already had, or was predisposed to um, anxiety or panic or um, fear of, like, or any phobias associated with, like, the crowds and the outside world. And um, that's this event must be just an amplifier to these fears and phobias.
Well, that's right. You feel that if we know that so many people have been working from home and have been isolated from everybody else. Like, we look at Melbourne, they're the lockdown capital of the world. They had well over 200 days of lockdown in the year. And it's a case of, when you look at that, you go, well, people start to living a new lifestyle when they're living at home. And now the biggest anxiety is, going out and socializing with people. So when you do go out, a lot of people are going to be, thankful for the getting home again. So getting away from those pressures, because we spend time doing something, we learn by rote learning, we do things over and over, we then set up a new pattern. And that's virtually what happened when people were isolated and at home. You set up a new pattern where you're only communicating with those people around you. And by the way, that has some stresses as well when we're in that situation. But then to then come out of that and go back to the workplace, that's definitely going to cause a lot of angst for people.
Plus fear, like,
Mm.
on almost like a professional and corporate level, based on pretty much like almost like on the human right chart. I see, like, I have a hard time seeing how um, any companies could actually impose or force someone to come back to the office.
That's it. Well, and the thing is, this is where there's going to be a lot of issues coming up, because you've got people who don't want to go back to the office, because leading up to the pandemic, the stats were showing from the Gallup research that 87% of people were disengaged in their work. They didn't want to be at work. A few years earlier, it was 48% didn't want to be at work, and 18% were actively telling everybody they didn't want to be at work. It was like a bit of rust sitting in the vehicle, and if you don't clean it out, the thing is the rust increases, and that's virtually what happened. So in 2018, it went from 66% in total to 87%. Then we get hit by the pandemic. And so I think the latest stats, the research was showing that 80% of people didn't want to go back to the workplace full time. And about 17% didn't want to ever go back to the workplace. And this is one of the reasons we had the big worry about the great resignation, as they're calling it, because people weren't happy at work. The leadership was fairly poor. When they talk about leadership training, most of it that I'd seen was more management training, treating people like resources and not treating them as assets. And the whole thing is, when you've got staff, you train them so they can leave, but you treat them in a way in which they want to stay. And that hasn't been happening. And then when the pandemic hit, people were working from home. Those that were able to work from home because of the white collar workers, etc. And so then they have to go back to the office. Well, they've set up a new routine at home. It took them a while to get past the problems with homeschooling the kids and shuffling all those different commitments that they had. But they got themselves into a routine, and now they don't want to go back to the workplace. And the businesses are realizing that we do need to socialize. You you do need to have your teams coming together. So we need to have a hybrid form of workplace now, where you spend a certain amount of time at work and a certain amount of time still working from home. So you can enjoy the extra time, but at the same time not taking that extra time that you're saving in travel and putting that into extra hours of work for your employer. So we need to keep the performance levels up, and that does mean that people need to socialise. And therefore getting them back into the office is important, but at the same time, improving the leadership qualities of our managers, and at the same time, giving those people that flexibility to still enjoy some of that time working from home.
Yes, and there's definitely people that will it's going to take a lot of time, not because it's their preference, but because they don't feel secure
Hmm.
in an open environment with other co-workers around them.
Well,
You talked about like the social distance, which by the way is weird because like we've changed. Like the past 10 years has changed completely what our social contacts are. Like
hmm,
most of them are virtual now. So, like using the social distancing to talk about physical distance
hmm,
is somewhat odd and ironic, maybe because these advices comes from older people that, haven't yet realized that, I'd say, the majority of our social contacts are virtual.
that,
um so it's kind of a like you made me realize that it is indeed like an odd um expression to use. um but on top of it, like we're not even in the post-mortem of that situation of the pandemic. We're not even past like that the like it's not even over yet.
that,
um So it's gonna, like I said, like I have a feeling that it's gonna take a while for an employer to say, well, I want you back in, into the office, and just bite it. I actually just don't see it yet.
hmm. So if we've got the wiser employers are going to sit down and negotiate it and realise that people are social beings. They do need to come into the office. One of the issues that we've had when people are in the office, KPIs and other things that we put on people quite often, the pressures of that are quite strong. And so those that were managing their staff and not leading them would stand over their shoulders. And the staff didn't take them long to work out, well, what do I have to do to keep the boss off my back? What are the parts I can do and what parts can I ignore? And quite often the parts they ignore were a necessary part of the job. But because they were being micromanaged, they only did what they had to do, and they were always at a point of, at stress levels, worrying about who's looking over their shoulder. I've always realised if you treat your staff the same as you would a family member or even a love partner, what it comes down to, everybody feels love when they feel that they have a place that they belong, that they contribute, that they are respected, and they're valued. It's no different in the workplace. The only difference, as I keep saying to people, between looking at how you treat your loved ones, your love partner, for instance, to compared to those at work, is that there should be no sex at work. The rest of it is exactly the same thing, treating them in a way in which that person feels valued. If you do that, because we hear all the time, all these coaches telling everybody who's running a business, you need to work on your business. How in the world do you work on your business when you've got to micromanage your staff because none of them want to be there? But if you treat them in a way in which they want to be there, the end result is that they will then be self motivated. They will be the ones who keep the business running and profitable, so you can then go and work on your business. So you've got to have people in the business working in it without supervision so that you can have all that time free to go and manage and grow the business further, work on those aspects of the business. So manage yourself and not the staff. Let the staff lead them in a way in which they manage themselves. And this is one of the biggest challenges. And I think the great resignation that we're hearing about today is proof of that not having been done in the past.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you know, it's a bit of a shit show, to be honest.
Exactly, it certainly is. See, the other thing is too, for those that are in that position of leadership, uh, and they're worried about staff leaving and everything else, there's two other things that are coming out of this up. They're following on. One is they're talking about the great cancellation. And one of the issues there is that they're worried now that those that do leave their jobs, and if they're angry enough with the employers, have been treated in a way in which they've left feeling very much put out, that things like TikTok and LinkedIn and Facebook will start being used to name and shame those employers. That's going to have a massive impact on the profitability of those companies. And then they're talking about, oh, yes, but a lot of those people will find that they can't find a job elsewhere and they'll come back. So we're hearing them calling them boomerangs. So they go away, they'll come back again. And people go, yes, well, we've got them under our thumb then, because when they come back, we'll sort them right out. Well, you're going to make your situation even worse again. As I said before, if you treat your people in a way in which they feel valued and everything else, train them so that they can leave, but treat them in a way so they don't want to leave. And if they do leave because, well, I know in Melbourne, for instance, you can't find a chef down there for love or money. They've all, because of all the lockdowns, all the chefs had to move on to other careers to be able to survive. And now they're not going back to that profession because they don't know what's going to happen with COVID. Are we going to end up with a new strain? Are we going to get locked down again? So they've just moved on. And so when it comes to those staff that do go back, you have the doors open in a way in which they can come back in, feel valued, and you treat them the right way, so that then they're even going to be even more loyal than they could have been before. So it all comes back at the moment. There's a real lesson here for us to really look at the way in which we communicate with people and how we build relationships. Because at the end of the day, relationships are the foundation of everything we do. And without a relationship, you have nothing. You can't raise your kids. You can't find a love partner. You won't keep the partner you've got. You have problems at work, the stresses and the mobbing and other things that go on, or the arguments. You've got to be able to build relationships. And that's what's come out of the pandemic, is the need to be able to do that and do it in a way in which you're looking after the other person. Because you do that, it will always come back to you.
Yes, I mean, yeah, again, like there's it has amplified or accelerated something that was coming and that was kind of inevitable at some point. You know, yeah,
Yeah, well, it's been coming through, gradually. It's been building and building. I put a post out on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, well before the pandemic, and it was just a picture of Richard Branson I found on the internet with a statement next to it: "Take care of your employees, and they'll take care of your business." It's that simple. And I put a post up and said, "Well, if it is that simple, why is it that 87% of people are disengaged?" And I waited for the reactions. That started getting, I think it had about, ended up with about 13,000 shares by the time it had run its course. But before it did, I was getting a lot of comments from people having a go at their employers and employers complaining about their staff. And I put another one up, another picture of Richard Branson with the same statement, but leading into it was customers don't come first, employees come first. And then that statement again. And I said, yes, it is that simple, and this is how you do it. Well, that was like I'd opened the birdcage up and thrown the cat in. There were feathers flying left, right, and centre, people having a go at each other, with well over 100,000 interactions on the posts I put up. And it pointed out that there was a massive problem there. And everyone's going, but you've got to look after your customers. Well, you look after your customers by looking after your staff. So your staff who are dealing with the customers in a better mood and happier and everything else, and want to look after your customers. So when you put your staff first, you're actually putting your customers first. It's a paradox, but it's a simple one when you stop and think about it. And that's what we need to get to the people in business at the moment, to understand that. So if they do need their staff back into the workplace, the staff will come in and feel that they belong there, and they won't have the problems that they've had before with the micromanagement.
there was I don't know if you had like the opportunity to read the Zappos founder biography, which he talks about kind of the Zappos culture.
Mm,
It was e-commerce retail for shoes, um, and it got purchased by Amazon for 1.2 billion. Unfortunately, the kind of the conclusion of like the founder's life was catastrophic. Like it was really really bad. Like he did well. He actually people suspect that he probably killed himself with the 1.2 billion.
mm,
But the book was written before that, and the philosophy behind it is every new employee had to at least do a day um, of each and every of the important roles within the organization.
mm.
So a CFO had to spend a day on the phone um, doing customer service.
That's it.
Then there was like the hiring process would take a long time, and there would be some kind of a cash bonus if you realize yourself that you weren't a good fit for the company.
Mm,
So there was a few grand, $3,000-4,000, maybe five, that like if you realized within that training
mm.
and that new hire training boot camp that like you felt that like you weren't a fit for the company, you would just cash the check and leave.
That's it.
Um,
Mm,
and they were like they were one of the first company to put their headquarter in Vegas, but the old Vegas, like so they would revitalize the that like that region in Nevada. But it is such an interesting reading because it's all about you hire someone not for the role that you hire him for, but for the qualities that this individual has to add to your company.
that's it. It's always on the attitude. It's, you can always train people with skills. And even if there's a particular role that they're not gifted for because it's not part of their personality, you can always find a role that suits them. I love the idea of having all the managers and operate in those positions of the people that they're managing, so that they understand the workflow and everything else. Because coming in and just telling everybody what to do, but not understanding what it is that they do, makes it extremely difficult to lead them correctly. And it certainly causes a lot of problems with the people that you're supposed to be leading. So to be able to do that for a starter is absolutely important. But at the same time, if you bring somebody in the organization, they realize, well, okay, yes, I can do the job, but the culture here is not suiting my personality. Then to be able to, for that person to move on, yes, giving them a cash check where they can use that money to move on to another career. People go, oh, but you're giving so much away. And I go, well, what would be worse if they try and hang on because they're not fitting the role? That's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cost you in productivity. That person then is not going to be happy, and that's going to affect the other people around them. So even a $5,000 check is probably a great saving to the organisation to give that to somebody and let them go, than to have them stay and infect everybody else with their unhappiness within the role. Because we saw that, as I said before, in about 2016, it was 66% disengaged, and 2 years later, it was 87% disengaged. And that happened mainly because of the people who were upset and didn't want to be there initially, telling everybody else they didn't want to be there. They just wore everybody else down. And you can be working in a place where you're enjoying your work, but if everybody around you is complaining, it doesn't take long before you don't enjoy the job anymore. So to let those people go quickly is a very smart thing to do. And to give them some cash to go and do it faster, even better.
Like that's we could like this could be like a full blown episode all around like kind of the interaction or the attitude that like a company has to have with their employee. Like there's so much stuff, under that hood. Like there's and you see companies kind of losing. I worked for Microsoft, and they were, um, I was kind of I called that the post Ballmer era. Like, so Steve Ballmer was aggressive, was like quite, like the old school salesy type of guy. Like, charismatic for some people, but for a lot, like aggressive and you know
Mm,
um way too much. With like the promotion of Satya Nadella, um everything changed, and they were trying to get back to being cool,
mm,
and they're working hard at at going back there. um and it is an interesting uh conversation to have on, like what's the process of that, and how does, because like most of the senior leadership copycats
mm,
the owner or the CEO, right? And as you spread that attitude, or there's like a change, or, well, a major change in the attitude and the approach, um how long does it take before the employees perceives it, and it takes a while. Like
that's
I can, like I've seen it.
Well,
There were still people when, yeah.
yeah, think about raising children. Children watch their parents, and depending on the parents' behaviour, they learn from that behaviour. It's like a child who's been bullied at home will end up being a bully at school and elsewhere. We learn that behaviour. So if you've got a boss who's aggressive, then the management around them will then feel that aggression and pass that aggression on to the levels beneath them, and that just keeps going down. People say, well, what about the frontline people? Well, they take that home and they take it out on their spouse and they take it out on their kids. Everything's connected. This is what people don't realize. We learn behaviors. We don't, I always say to people, if what you're saying and what you're doing don't correlate, people will focus on what you're doing. As I say, the words are not that important. The words got to correlate with what you're doing, but people will focus on that side of it first. So if there's any mismatch, they'll always go with the non-verbals, what they're recognizing, what they're seeing. And so the more you can change and be uh, keep your language and everything else in line, but also thinking, well, right, if I act this way, the people I'm doing this to are going to act that way to others. So people who treat others with respect generally find the people they've taught with respect show that respect back to them, but also show it to the people around them as well. Everything is a learnt behavior, and we pass things on. So the more that somebody can understand somebody, because I'm a profiler, this is what I do. I teach people how to read other people, understand the other person's personality, and also know their own personality, and then change the way they like to be spoken to match the way the other person needs to be spoken to. The moment you do that, you've got a connection with the other person, and you do that all the time you're talking to them, you'll find that you'll have loyalty as well, and you will get their respect back. And this is where companies that are using those skills are the ones who are making the most money. But people say, oh, well, why should I look after my staff when, I give them a job, I pay them, and that, it's paying their bills. They should be loyal to me. And I go, well, if you treat them in a certain way, they'll respond in that way. So if you then treat them as though that they belong, that they have a place and everything else, they will then work harder to look after you. And if they do that and they're happier in their work, then they'll make more money for you. So as a business owner, you really need to know how to read your people. Each person is individually different to everybody else. I know there's a lot of psychometric profiling systems where you put people in boxes. Well, that's okay for you with getting an idea of where that person sits. But if you want to show them true respect, you take them out of the box and you treat them as an individual in their own right, who is uniquely different with different experiences to everybody else on the planet. And if you can connect with them in the way that they need to be spoken to, you're going to get their loyalty back. You're going to get their support. And when you ask them to do something, they're going to do it. And it changes the atmosphere within the organization straight away. And with that trust, then if you have got a hybrid system where they're going to be working sometime from home, you can trust them to be working at home when they're there. because they want to make sure they're doing the right thing by you. The same as if you've got a young child and you treat them in a way in which they feel that they're valued, they will go out of their way not to do the wrong thing. Teachers with students in class doing the same thing with these skills, connecting with a child, that child will go out of their way not to upset the teacher because the teacher is so respected because of the way they've spoken to and treated the child. This is what people don't realise. It's whatever you put out, you're going to get back. So the more that you can connect with somebody and put out the right connections, the right energies and everything else, you're going to get the positive response back. You yell at somebody, they're not going to smile at you unless they think that you're less than them, and the smile you'll get will be one of contempt, not one of actual true smiling. So I'm hoping this is making sense to the people who are listening to this podcast. The more that you actually follow that rule and know yourself, but definitely know the other person. It's not a matter of, we've heard it when we grew up, treat others as you would have them treat you. That's okay when it comes to respect. But in communications and building rapport and getting things done, you treat others in the way that they would like you to treat them. So knowing how to speak to them in the way that they want to be spoken to, know how to treat them in the way that they want to be treated. You do that, and every time you will have a stronger connection with them.
All right, Alan, let's get to know you. Maybe you want to rewind that tape life of, like that tape story life of yours. And, I usually ask my guests to bring it to wherever, milestone in their life that, like they feel, as define them as, as individual and human being. Where back would you bring me?
Well, at the moment, I'm about to turn 70. So in my life, there's been a lot of events that have moulded and changed the direction of my life. But for me, and I'll make it fairly simple here, very quick, I started off at the age of 3. My father died when I was 3. So I pretty much grew up as a loner all of my life. I didn't have any male role models. In fact, the one male role model I had was my mother's sister's husband, so my uncle, not a blood relation, but the married uncle, who told my fiancée at my engagement party she could do better than me. So I grew up very much alone and disconnected from people. This is where I realised that I needed to understand people. I didn't have the skills to do it because I didn't have any leadership around me, no male role models. But in my early 20s, the age of 23, I'd been put in charge of a group of men who were all older than me. I was 23 and my second in charge was 38. The other men were older than me as well. And I had to get them on side. So that was a big shift for me to actually start to understand people. And that's where body language came in for me to understand that, because that was the biggest thing that was around in those days that people were talking about. In the 80s, I got involved in psychometric profiling like Myers-Briggs and DISC and Enneagrams and other profiling systems. And that gave me a little bit more understanding. It was putting people in boxes, but it still wasn't drawing me close to them. And in the 90s, I got involved with NLP. I went through my first divorce, and I had 3 boys to raise on my own. They were 4, 11, and 12 years old. So with the 3 boys, having to get them on side and understand them. So that was a big shift for me in my life. And in my late 30s, I got involved with the surf club. And with that, I was put in charge of people who had better skills than me. I'd only been in the surf club for a short period of time, and I had to get them on side because I'd been put in charge. So I'd gone from being the youngest in employment to being in the surf club where I was the same age but the least experienced, and then raising 3 boys on my own. And after my second divorce, that's when I realised that was only a short marriage. I realised that I really need to understand people better, and that's when the face profiling came into it for me. So the facial features, it may sound a little bit woo-woo that they tell you your personality, but if you think about it, you lift weights, you're going to build muscles in your body. And if you whatever you feel inside, you express outwardly. So that's where the body language and the expressions on your face work. Put those two things together, that when you're concentrating and thinking about things, you're going to pull expressions on your face, and those expressions are going to create ridges and crevices on your face. And so your face is a history of how you like to think and process. That's your personality, not your character, but your personality. It talks about, or shows me how you like to think and process, but not what you're thinking and processing. But once I've got that, I know how to change the way I like to be spoken to, and then I know how to speak to you in the way that you want to be spoken to. And then I've got the body language and the expressions that then give you the feedback. So now I've got your character. So whether I've read you right, whether there's something emotionally going on, and are you telling me the truth? And that's what I teach people to do. So you can see from my history, it's been an accumulation of things that I've had to learn along the way. A lot of angst, a lot of headaches. I went through depression when in some of those areas. So there's not really any area that I can't speak on that I haven't either experienced myself or have been involved with other people going through it, where I've been there to support them. And that's one of the things that I keep saying to people. There's a lot of things that will happen in your life. You may feel that sometimes they're more than you can carry, but if you think about it, and especially if you get the right support around you, there's nothing in this life that you can't overcome. It's just a matter of finding the right resources, and that may be some skills, or it might be other people around you to be part of that process. But if it's other people, it just goes to prove you need those relationships, because without it, you have no way of moving forward in life. You can't raise children, you can't find a partner, you can't keep that partner. You need to be able to relate to people in business. So you can see that all those things that have happened in my life have added to me learning these skills that I now pass on to other people.
Does you told me about some traumatic, almost traumatic event in your young life. Can you
Oh, yeah.
elaborate?
So
Yeah.
there's nothing in my life that I'm ashamed of or that I won't talk about, because at the end of the day, obviously I'll cover this first of all. If anybody's feeling shame, my question I always ask them is, well, did you knowingly make a bad decision at that time, or did you use the information that you made that decision with? And they say to me, oh, I used the information that I had at the time to make the decision. I go, okay, you can regret the decision you made, but don't have any shame for it, because you can only have shame if you knew you were doing the wrong thing when you did something that was wrong. So at the age of 9, I'd been, bullied at school. I hated school. I couldn't wait to get home. And then when I got home, I spent all my time on my own. I had pets, and I used to spend time with my cats and dogs, and that was pretty much my life. And at the age of 9, I'd had enough. I didn't feel that I belonged at home, where I was living with my mother and sister. And I decided one day that I had enough, and I climbed into her pill cupboard and I tried to commit suicide. But it was while I was in the process of taking some pills. And the silly thing was, instead of just opening up a bottle of pills and taking those tablets, I didn't want to get caught. Here I am trying to take my life, but I don't want to get caught. So I'm taking a pill from each of the different bottles. And there were plenty of bottles in the cupboard. But partway through, I thought to myself, they're going to be happy when I'm gone. And I thought, what in the world am I making them happy for? And it was that because I got so angry at that point, thinking that I was doing what everybody else had wanted me to do, all the people who didn't care for me, I got angry. And that stopped me from taking any more of the pills. And I then lived with anger up until my late teens. And that was how I survived. And I realized that when people talk about having a particular emotion is wrong, no, we are a combination of all of our experiences. We experience every anger, but it's how we use that anger. And that's what I learnt along the way, that having the anger kept me alive, but to use that anger and take it out on other people, then that would be wrong. So you'll feel every emotion. You decide how you're going to use that emotion, and use it in a positive way. Even anger has its place. You came along and you threatened my family. I tell you what, I'm not turning the other cheek. I'm going to get angry in return. I'm going to protect them. So there is no wrong emotion. It's how you use the emotion. And that's one of the things that I learnt back then. And that's stayed with me all my life. And as I said, I'm about to turn 70, so that's over 60 years that I've learnt that, and I've lived with that knowledge all the way through.
Does in terms of, you were quite young, as you said, and I do you feel you were already carrying, a kind of the weight of life on your shoulder? How come, how do you get to that point?
Well, as I said, being bullied at school and then at home, my sister and I never really spoke. She was 2.5 years older than me. My mother was a very efficient woman. She was a carpenter. She learnt to do everything on her own. She wasn't going to have a man around after Dad had died. And so she was very competent. And because of that, she was fairly direct. So I got a lot of boundaries put in place and everything else. And thankfully, I had those boundaries, because if I hadn't had those, I could have gone down the wrong path. But it was the fact that there was so much there and no one to talk to, no one to share it with. As I said, my uncle didn't really like me at all when I was growing up, and actually told my fiance what he told her uh, at our engagement party. So always feeling that I was on my own. I guarantee a lot of people who are listening to this are probably saying that, yeah, they've felt on their own as well. And when you're there and you can't see there's a solution, you think this is all that's going to happen. This is all you're going to get for the rest of your life. You think, why bother? Well, as I said, I was lucky that I got angry. I had that realization, because if I hadn't had that realization at that moment, I wouldn't be here today. I would have finished taking all of those pills. And so, you know, that pressure, it doesn't matter how old you are, because again, you might say, oh, but a young child, why should you feel that way? Well, you've only got the knowledge that you got at that age. And because I had limited knowledge, there was no way that I could find a solution. If I had those same issues today, it's like water off a duck's back with the knowledge I have now. And this is the whole thing, that realizing that if your kids have gone quiet, something's going on. If they're acting out, there's something going on, because kids don't try and break the parents. They'll push you in that to see if you can hold. They want you to work out what's going on. They need you to be able to understand them. And I didn't have any of that. So I felt totally alone. And that's why I got to that point of desperation. In my later years, it would have been in my late 30s, when I was still trying to learn to understand people. I had some, because my group in telecom grew really quickly, the organisation I worked in, and I had a couple of people there who were always a pain. They always had their knife in my back, and I got that depression, couldn't get the management to help out at all, felt totally alone, went home. My wife didn't want to know about it, and I developed depression. But again, I found that when I did finally find someone I could just sit and talk to, not somebody who would give me solutions, but somebody who would just sit and hold my space and listen to me, that I then realized that I was able to talk and work through and understand more about myself in those conversations, which is another reason why I run the Campfire Project now, for those men and women to be able to come along and share their stories. Because we don't need to be counselled in a lot of cases. We just need to be heard. As I say to people, we've got 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion. And if somebody is telling you their what's going on in their life, listen to them, watch their body language, pick up all the nonverbals. But when you do open your mouth, ask questions. Ask them to clarify more. And when they tell you more about that, then ask them, what I'm getting is this right? Ask them more questions then. So the more that you listen to somebody and hold that space for them, this is how you help people who are going through pressures and stresses. So if anybody feels that they relate to what I've been saying about myself, what I went through, and they're going through it now, reach out for somebody who can hold that space. Because they say the biggest problem we have today is when somebody is talking about the issues they've got, the people around them, on average, it's 19 seconds before they jump in and try and give them advice. They're only telling you their opinion about how it will affect them. They're not telling you about you. So if somebody really wants to help you, stop and listen, and don't give suggestions. Ask questions so that the person you're talking to is going through stress can find their own solutions. As I said, when I was climbing into that pill cupboard, it was my inner voice that was talking to me, asking me, why are you doing this? Why are you making these people happy? That I then, because the voice had said to me, don't do this, I probably would have kept doing it. But because the voice was, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to make people happy who are making your life miserable? That's when I found my answer and I stopped.
What would 70-year-old Alan tell you, like your young, the young version of you, while picking, like the file cabinet?
Well, one of the things I have learnt along the way is that the most important thing I'll ever learn is the next thing I learn after I think I know everything. So I always keep an open mind. But there's an old Arab saying that trust everybody but lock up your camels at night, which virtually means, well, I interpret that when I look at learning new things. My thing to my younger self would have always been, yes, listen to coaches, find out as much as you can, learn as much as you can, but keep your own counsel on that. Take what everybody has told you and work it out for yourself. Does this really fit you? Because one of the things, because I was so desperate to move forward and find myself, I listened to everybody. And what I realized later on, it was nothing but their opinion based on their personal situations, their experiences, and their biases. It was not based on me. So, yes, listen to what other people have got to say, but work it out for yourself. Ask yourself, if what this person just told me, is this really me? Is it they're really talking about themselves? There's an old saying, when somebody points at you with that one extended finger, there are three fingers pointing back. So when somebody's giving you advice, one of the things I would have said to myself, listen to the advice, but ask yourself, is this advice that's really for you, or is this advice that that person should be taking themselves? And if I'd did that, I would have grown up a lot clearer in my thinking.
And what, like, what is the name of, like the coaching you offer?
Well, it's not so much a name of coaching. My business is under my personal name, which is Alan Stevens. That's Alan with one L, ALAN, and Stevens, STEVENS. The website's .com.au for Australia. You'll find a lot of information in there. But the main thing is that it's this, I've taken four different skills and turned them into, or four sciences: the body language, the micro expressions, the facial features, the NLP, the language, and I've turned it into an art form. So what I do is the science and art of reading people, but the business I run is human pattern recognition, and the process is rapid trait profiling. So with coaching people with rapid trait profiling to build stronger relationships in their lives for whatever reason or any area of their life that they have. So it's not a particular like life coaching, or people give it a lot of different names. I just ask people, do you want to build a stronger relationship? And whatever I teach them is designed for them, not off the shelf. So I don't have a one package fits all. I always spend time listening, as I said, two eyes, two ears and one mouth. Listen, find all the information that's about them, finding out and working out exactly what they need, and then design something around that for them.
And I'm guessing that you based on kind of the it's an umbrella of tool that you've developed through the years. So you your approach makes it that you can meet with any kind of problematic.
That's it. So for a number of years, I was also a massage therapist, aromatherapist. I'd worked with sound therapies and colour therapies. And in fact, sound therapies and colour therapies I introduced into the Singapore hospital for kids with ADHD. And so I've worked in a lot of different modalities. So it's not some people will go and learn NLP, or they'll go and learn a psychometric profiling platform, and then that's the answer to everything as far as they're concerned. I go, no, there are no two people on the planet who are the same. Everybody's uniquely different. So I need to find out as much as I can about that person, and then open up my toolkit with all the tools in it and pull out the tools that best fit their situation. And if I don't have those tools, then my job is to find somebody else who can look after them as quickly as possible without wasting their time and move them on to their solutions. So when you put the other person first, you're always going to be looking at what tools should I use in this situation, or should I pass them to somebody else who's got better tools or a different set of tools that would work with that person, and vice versa.
Well, Alan, this was a great conversation we just had. It's I we could have like hours of conversation around like so many different topics. I feel, and just don't want to go all over the place for people to at least have like you know just perceive like what you can do and how you could help them, and make sure that people, if they need to, reaches out to you. And our conversation around like the pandemic and like the workplace and all that, is quite eye opening. And it's always in the back of my mind on how people are going to behave in the future, after all of these events. And I'm still super intrigued on like what is the thought of the people around me about this subject. So it was great conversation to have. And finally, I'm going to ask you, like, where can people find you, like the like, just so that people are able to reach out if they need to.
Well, the best place is if they go to my website, which is alanstevens.com.au for Australia. It's Alan, ALAN, and Stevens, STEVENS. I always direct people, first of all, to as I said before, you check everything out for yourself. Now, I can talk all day about what I do, and it can sound quite impressive, but I always say go and have a look at the website, have a look at the success story page, and that's where you'll hear from other people, which will give you an idea of all the areas where this can work and how that might work for you. And then if you like that, just hit the contact button there and send me a message, and I'll happily have a chat with you and see find out about your situation and point you in the direction that best suits you.
Well, this was a great time, Alan. Really, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. I recommend everyone to go check out the website and like, make sure that you reach out to if you need. So thanks for your time, Alan. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, one other thing on that website, if you put the / after it and the word free, FREE, everybody can download a free course, which takes them 28 minutes, which will give them a couple of tips on how to read personalities, but also where the eyes move when someone's sourcing information. That's a gift for all the people who are listening to this podcast.
Awesome. So alanstevens.com.au/free. And you can actually pick up some free material from Alan.
It's a free 28-minute course. It'll give them a few tips that they'll be able to use straight away.
Really appreciate it, Alan. Really. I wish you the best. And it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. I've really enjoyed it with you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.